I sat in the corner of the sunroom, the light streaming in through the linen curtains I hemmed myself decades ago. My fingers were trembling slightly, still sore from the embroidery I had finished just that morning. It was a small thing, a hand-stitched quilted throw with seashells in soft beige and sea glass blue, the kind that held stories in its threads. I had worked on it every evening, squinting through my glasses, thinking of her, thinking of that little girl who used to run barefoot across this very floor with sand between her toes and ice cream on her cheeks. It was her bridal shower, held in my home, the one by the ocean, the one everyone always said felt like a memory they didn't know they missed. The air smelled of lemon cake and old wood and salt. My daughter-in-law had organized everything, meticulously, with printed napkins and rented chairs and a playlist that was too loud for my liking. Still, I had smiled. For her. When it was my turn to give my gift, I stood slowly. My knees ached, not from age, but from too many hours spent kneeling on the wooden floor, trimming the edges of the quilt. I handed it to her with both hands, quietly, lovingly, the way I always offered her things. With patience, with care, she took it, unfolded it, looked at it, then said without hesitation, without malice, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "This handmade gift looks cheap." And then she laughed. Everyone laughed. And I sat back down. I don't remember the rest of the afternoon, only that my hands kept trembling, but not from the sewing. That night, the house fell quiet again, the way it does after everyone's gone, when the clinking glasses stop and the perfume clears. I walked barefoot across the cool tile floor, picking up crumpled napkins, half-empty glasses with lipstick stains, and silver forks left askew on the tablecloth I'd ironed twice. The silence was a comfort, but also a mirror. It reflected back everything I didn't want to see. I found the quilt lying folded on the edge of the sofa, exactly where she'd left it. Untouched, unwanted. As if it had somehow embarrassed her, as if it was too heavy with something she didn't want to carry. Memory, maybe. Or love that had aged and softened and wasn't sleek enough for her curated life. I ran my hand across the threads, my fingertips landing on the tiny shell I had embroidered near the corner, a replica of the one she found when she was 6, and proudly declared it the prettiest thing on the beach. I'd kept that moment inside me for decades. She had forgotten it in seconds. I sat down beside it and let myself sink slowly into that worn couch, the one her grandfather and I bought when we thought we'd be growing old here together. I remembered how he used to fall asleep in this very spot, mouth slightly open, the sound of the waves barely audible through the glass doors. I missed him more in that moment than I had in months. Not because he could have stopped the laughter, but because he would have reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it. I looked around the room, the paintings, the driftwood shelf, the lamp with the cracked base. Every item told a story. My story, our story. And I suddenly realized how invisible that story had become. To her, to them. She didn't mean to be cruel. I believed that. She's young. She wants things polished and perfect. Instagram ready. And I am not polished anymore. My love is soft, hand-stitched, and a little uneven. But that night, as the ocean whispered through the open window and the quilt sat beside me like a ghost of effort, I made a decision, not out of anger, but out of clarity. A quiet, sudden clarity. The house no longer belonged to the future, not hers, not anyone's. It was time to let go. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The sky outside was still the color of a bruise. soft purples, silvers, and deep fading blues. The sea was calm, hushed, like it, too, was holding its breath. I moved slowly, as I always do now. My bones speak louder than I do these days, but something inside me was already decided. And I didn't want to wait long enough for doubt to wake up and start whispering. I made coffee, the old way, on the stovetop, with the little tin pot that rattled if you didn't watch it. I sat in the kitchen alone, wrapped in my cardigan, listening to the ticking of the wall clock and the faint sound of gulls outside. And for the first time in months, I didn't cry when I thought of him, my husband. I imagined him there beside me, not saying a word, just nodding slowly with that knowing smile of his. He always did know what I was thinking before I ever said it out loud. By 8 a.m., I was dressed, steady, and standing at the edge of the property with my phone in hand. I called the real estate agent, the same woman who once helped my son buy his second condo. She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Are you sure, Mrs. Hale? You told me once you'd never leave that house." I looked out at the waves brushing against the sand, the white porch swaying just slightly in the breeze. I thought of my granddaughter's voice echoing in the living room. "This looks cheap." I thought of their laughter. I thought of how quiet it had been after. "I'm sure," I said. And I was. By noon, the paperwork was already in motion. She was fast. The kind of fast that didn't ask too many questions. That afternoon, I walked room by room. I touched everything once. The frame with his photo in the hallway, the chipped corner of the vanity, the spot near the back door where the tile dipped slightly. I wasn't saying goodbye with tears or speeches. I was simply acknowledging it all, as if each object was nodding back at me, saying, "Thank you for remembering." I paused longest in the guest room, the one she always used as a child, where she once built a fort of blankets and pillows and declared it her castle. The bed was neatly made now. The invitation envelope still lay on the desk, addressed in her handwriting, tied with a pale ribbon. I picked it up. The date was circled with a small heart. I placed it gently in the drawer and closed it. That would be the last time I held it. Then I returned to the sunroom where the quilt still rested. I folded it carefully, pressing each edge, and carried it upstairs to the cedar chest. I placed it inside with the other forgotten things: letters, pressed flowers, a lock of baby hair from decades ago. And then, quietly, I shut the lid. The news traveled quickly, as I knew it would. In small towns like ours, nothing stays quiet for long. Not engagements, not divorces, and certainly not the sudden sale of a house that had stood by the shore for over 40 years. My son called me the next day. His voice had that uneasy rhythm it always took on when he was trying to be respectful but also slightly demanding. "Mom," he began, "I just heard from Allison. She's upset." I let the silence hang for a moment, not to be cruel, but because I was listening. Not to him, but to myself. For so long I had filled every space with apologies, with reassurances, with softening. But now I simply waited, and eventually he filled the space for me. "She said you sold the beach house." "Is that true?" "It is." "But Mom, her wedding will still be beautiful," I said gently, "just somewhere else." I could hear the tension on the other end, the way he pressed his palm to his forehead. He always did that when frustrated. She already sent out the invitations. The venue was going to be the porch, remember? And the archway? And the view. "Yes," I interrupted softly. I remember it all." He sighed. There was a long pause before he spoke again, this time quieter. "Why now?" I turned toward the window. The sunlight was dancing across the water, casting flickering reflections on the old fence. I felt no anger, no regret, only a gentle kind of ache, like something healing. Because, Daniel, I said, it's time someone saw me. That caught him off guard, and I could hear it in the breath he didn't take. For a moment, he didn't speak. And I realized then just how invisible I'd become in their world. The reliable grandmother, the host of holidays, the quiet figure who made pies and knitted scarves and took photos from the corner of the room while everyone else lived out loud. But not once had anyone asked what I want. The beach house was not just a home. It was the last place that still had my fingerprints on it, still held my laughter and sorrow and secrets. And when she mocked that quilt, not with cruelty but with careless ease, it felt like the echo of 1,000 moments where I'd been quietly dismissed. So I reclaimed something, not to punish, but to remember. Tell her, I said finally, that I hope her day is beautiful, truly. But this was something I needed to do. He didn't understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wasn't waiting for understanding anymore. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and walked down to the shore. The wind was picking up and the tide was beginning to roll in. I stood there, toes in the sand, the horizon wide and endless in front of me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing in the center of my own life. Not someone's memory, not someone's background, just me. A week passed. The real estate agent had already lined up 3 serious buyers. She said the market was strong and the location irresistible. I didn't ask the price they were offering. I didn't need to. I wasn't selling the house for money, not really. I was letting it go because it no longer recognized me. Or maybe I no longer recognized myself inside it. I spent those days sorting through drawers, touching old linen, and wrapping dishes in newspaper. I came across a photo of my husband holding our granddaughter when she was just a baby. Her tiny hand clutching his finger, her mouth open in a toothless grin. He looked so solid. I ran my thumb over the image, and for a moment, I was back there, in that warm, golden day. The scent of baby powder, the hum of cicadas. The world had felt full then, rooted, safe. Now it felt hollow in a different way. Not because I was alone, but because I had filled too many years with silence, with being agreeable, with being kind at the expense of being honest. There was a box I hadn't opened in over a decade, tucked behind the winter coats in the hall closet. Inside were journals, letters, scraps of poems I wrote but never shared. One entry caught my eye. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was mine, unmistakably. I hope they see me, not just what I give, but what I am. I don't remember writing that, but I remember the ache, the quiet desire to be more than useful, to be known, not just needed. The phone rang mid-afternoon. This time, it was her, my granddaughter. "Grandma?" Her voice was thin, tentative. "Hello, sweetheart." There was a pause. Then, "I didn't mean it like that. The quilt, I mean. I was just joking. You know how people are at parties. Everyone was watching." I could hear the nervous tapping of her nails against her phone. I pictured her in some bright kitchen, maybe holding a latte, wearing one of those perfect outfits that look effortless but cost more than I'd ever spent on groceries in a week. "I know," I said quietly. "You were trying to be funny." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you really selling the house?" "I am." "Because of me?" The weight of that question hung heavy in the air. I looked out at the porch. the one she'd planned to walk down in a white dress with flower petals scattered at her feet. "No," I said gently, "because of me." There was a silence after that, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that asks you to sit still and listen. She didn't apologize, not fully, but I didn't expect her to. She was young, full of motion, too busy trying to become someone to realize she'd overlooked who I already was. Before we ended the call, she whispered, "I loved that shell design on the corner. I remembered it from when I was little." I closed my eyes. A small smile pulled at the edge of my lips. "Thank you," I said. "That's enough." And strangely, it was. The last evening I spent in the house felt different from all the others, as if the walls knew, as if the floorboards remembered every footstep, every holiday, every argument, every dance in the kitchen, and were bracing for their final goodbye. I lit the old lamps instead of the overhead lights. The soft amber glow turned the rooms golden, warm, like candlelight on skin. I didn't rush through anything. I move it slowly, almost ceremonially, as if each action was a way of honoring not just the home, but the woman I had been inside it. In the kitchen, I pulled down the teacup I always saved for guests, the one with the delicate blue flowers, a faint crack along the rim. I brewed chamomile tea the way I always had. I sat at the table alone, the wood smooth beneath my fingers, and listened to the quiet. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. A stillness that wrapped around me like a blanket, asking me not to explain myself, not to justify, just to be. I took out an old notebook and wrote one last letter I would never send. "Dear Allison," I began, "you are so loved, more than you can know. And not just because you're mine, but because I remember the little girl who used to collect seashells and press them into my hands like treasures. I remember your laughter echoing through the hallway, your arms around my waist when you had bad dreams, your drawings taped crookedly on the fridge. You are not cruel. You are simply in motion, speeding toward your life, your story. I understand that now, but I am no longer a stop along the way. I am not the destination either. I am something older, quieter, something like the ocean that lives behind this house. Constant, generous, but not meant to be owned. One day, maybe, you'll have a granddaughter too, and maybe you'll try to show her your love in 1,000 invisible ways. And maybe, God help you, she will laugh at your gift. And in that moment, you will understand everything. This house was filled with love, but it is not the only place love can live. Be kind to the women who made you, even the ones who outgrew their place in your story, with love always. Grandma. I folded the page and tucked it inside the back of the notebook. I would leave it there, packed away among my books and keepsakes. Not to be read now, but perhaps one day when she was ready to receive it. I stepped out onto the porch as night settled in. The sky was dark velvet, punctured by stars. The wind carried the sound of waves and the faint rustle of the eucalyptus tree that stood near the fence. I could see my reflection in the glass of the patio doors. I looked older than I remembered, not just in skin and hair, but in posture. And yet, there was something new in my expression, too. Something lighter, a woman no longer waiting to be seen. From the edge of the porch, I looked down at the sand where Allison once wrote her name with a stick, giggling when the tide erased it. And I realized something quietly profound. The ocean doesn't keep what you give it. It takes everything and returns something else. Not always what you expect, but always something new. Before going inside, I whispered aloud to no one and to everything. I have loved, I have given, and now I begin again. The morning I handed over the keys, the world was calm, almost deliberately so. The realtor arrived in a tailored navy coat and polite shoes that weren't made for sand. She smiled warmly, professionally, as if this were any other transaction. She didn't know that this wasn't a house to me. It was skin I was shedding. I gave her the keys in the sunroom. She admired the light in the room, the way it warmed the floorboards. Buyers love that, she said, meaning well. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. I had already taken down the family photos, boxed up the tea tins, folded the afghans that still smelled faintly of lavender and old seasons. The quilt, though, that I left in the cedar chest. It belonged to the house now. A quiet message between old walls and future strangers. After she left, I stayed one more hour. I walked barefoot across every room, whispering goodbye not in words, but in memories. In the kitchen I saw him, my husband, laughing as he stirred his terrible oatmeal, always forgetting the salt. I remembered how he'd rest his chin on my shoulder while I cooked, humming something out of tune. He hadn't been perfect, but he had loved me in a way that left echoes. I smiled through the sting in my chest. In the hallway, I touched the wall where Allison once scribbled her name in red crayon, swearing it wasn't her. I had never painted over it, not out of sentiment, but because something in me believed love should be allowed to leave marks. Not every memory needs to be polished. I paused outside the guest room door. The bed was bare now. The drawer still held her invitation, unopened. I didn't take it with me. I didn't need to. The decision had already been made, the path already taken. And regret. It was no longer welcome here, only understanding. And maybe a bit of grace. On the porch, the wind greeted me like an old friend. It danced around my ankles, lifted my hair. I leaned against the railing and let my eyes roam the horizon. The sea was exactly as it had always been, indifferent, beautiful, wild. It didn't care that this was an ending. It had seen 1,000 of them, and would see 1,000 more. But I did care. I pulled from my coat pocket a small jar. Inside were the ashes of dried petals, flowers from our 20th anniversary, pressed and kept in my drawer for decades. It felt right to let them go here. I unscrewed the lid, tipped the jar into the wind, and watched the flecks of rose and white swirl into the air, caught and carried away, dancing over the beach, into the sea. It wasn't sad. It was sacred. By the time I walked down the porch steps and into my car, I didn't feel like someone who had lost a home. I felt like someone who had reclaimed something older, deeper, something that can't be boxed up or signed away. My hands, resting on the steering wheel, were steady. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. Some goodbyes don't require one last glance. I live in a smaller place now. It's not near the ocean, and the windows don't hum with salt or wind, but they open wide, and in the morning the light comes in gently across the hardwood floors. I've placed my chair by the window, not for watching, but for seeing. Sometimes I just sit there with a cup of tea, letting the silence speak. The rooms are quiet, but not empty. There are fewer things, fewer expectations, too. I hung one photo on the wall, just one. It's of me, taken years ago when I didn't know someone was watching. I'm laughing. That's what I chose to keep. The rest I carry inside. Some evenings I unfold the notebook and read the letter I never mailed. I don't cry anymore. Not because I'm numb, but because there's a peace in finally saying the thing that lived in me for so long. Being unseen was never the wound. Staying silent about it, that was. I've started sewing again, not for anyone, not to impress or offer, Just because I love the feel of fabric between my fingers, the rhythm of thread pulling through cotton, I stitched a small shell into the corner of my latest piece. No one will see it but me. That's enough. Sometimes Allison texts, just sold the things. A photo of a new plant, a question about an old recipe. She never brings up the house. Neither do I. That thread doesn't need to be tugged anymore. Some ties remain, even when they're no longer pulled tight. One night, not long ago, I dreamt of the porch swing swaying in the breeze. In the dream, I was alone, but not lonely. I woke with the sense that something had shifted, not in the world, but in me. I don't need to be part of someone else's story to be whole in my own. And maybe that's the quiet truth of growing older. The realization that your worth doesn't diminish just because others stop looking. You were always enough, even when no one said it, even when they laughed, even when they forgot. Especially then.